Chapter 33 Sight. The morning of the war found me tired and aching. My head felt as though it were stuffed with prickly jute fibers. All night, in between fragments of dreams, faces coalesced out of the darkness of my tent. My husband's, my son's, Dhri, and last of all a man with ancient, unsettling eyes. When he appeared, I could not bear to lie in bed any longer. Although the sun was barely up and the war had not yet begun, I decided to climb the hill. Last night I had informed no one of my conversation with Vyasa or the gift he had given me. To tell the truth, I didn't fully believe in it myself. Now I merely instructed my maid to tell Subhadra that I was going, so she would not worry. I added that no one should disturb me, because I would be at prayer. It wasn't a lie. As I observed the war, I would ask the gods to protect the people I cared for. Would it be treachery if one of them was fighting on the other side? As I climbed, I heard the trumpets calling warriors to readiness. The horses neighed in excitement. They knew something momentous was about to begin. I confess, my heart too speeded up in anticipation. If Vyasa had spoken the truth, I was to be a witness, the only witness on our side, the only woman ever, to the grand spectacle that was about to play itself out. No matter how the war ended, my role in it was something to be proud of. But as I reached the summit, against my will, my footsteps slowed. My legs would not hold me up. A great weight pulled at my eyelids. I sat down. I didn't know whether on a rock or the bare ground. I saw and heard nothing. I did not feel the sun beating down on me. As I was pulled from the state I had always thought of as consciousness, I realized that the role I would play now had nothing to do with Panchali's pride. The force that was entering me, I felt its pounding roughness in every cell of my body, would use me for its purpose. Too late, I was afraid. For the rest of the war, I climbed the hill each morning and passed into this state. For want of a better word, I call it a trance. All day I experienced neither hunger nor thirst, though by evening I was exhausted and could barely make my way down. It was during this time that my hair turned white and flesh melted away from my body. When Subhadra realized what was happening, though she didn't understand it, she sent a maidservant with me to give me water, for that was all I could take, and bring me down safely each evening. The girl told me later that I often wept or laughed, scaring her. Sometimes I chanted in unknown language. I have no recollection of this, but for the rest of my life I wouldn't forget the images that came to me, those that I would try to find words for later, and those that were so terrible that I left them locked inside me. I had expected the sight to be something like looking through a telescope, but I was mistaken. True, I saw distant scenes as clearly as though they were happening a few arms' lengths away from me, but that was the least of it. For instance, I saw silver-haired Bhishma in the forefront of the Kaurava army, seated in his silver chariot. A golden palm tree waved on his banner. He was exhorting his troops, telling them that the gates of heaven had opened wide today to let in all that would die on the battlefield. His face was filled with vigor and a strange gaiety, and his words rang with such conviction that I believed him. But as I watched his face, it shifted and wavered like an image drawn on water. I felt his tiredness in my own body. His heart was so heavy, I wondered that he had the strength to even draw breath. I realized that the sight allowed me to penetrate the masks of men and look into their core, and I was at once elated and terrified. I looked up at the sky, hoping for a sign that what Bhishma said was true, but it shone above me, a blank and comfortless blue. If war forced even a great soul such as Bhishma to dissemble, what hope was there for the rest of us? I saw Duryodhana pacing under his banner, a serpent in a field of gold. Kill Sikhandi first, he instructed his generals. No one else can destroy Bhishma. And as long as Bhishma leads us, we are invincible. Under his gold crown, his face was thinner, his eyes like lighted coals as he stared at the Pandava host. But the harsh line of his lips softened as he turned toward the warriors who had positioned themselves around him. "I will not forget your loyalty," he said to them, touching one and then the other on the shoulder. They smiled back at him. I was shocked to feel love rising from them, shimmering like heat from a summer pavement. Their willingness to die at his command. He beckoned a messenger close, detached a jewel from his headdress. "Give this to Bhanumati. Tell her I'll come to her as soon as I can." Then his eyes darkened, searching the field. "Where is Karna?" he asked. "One of you, go, tell him Duryodhana calls. Today more than ever I need my friend beside me." Even in the trance, my breath grew uneven. My hands trembled with anticipation. But before I could see Karna, the vision pulled me toward the Pandava army. How puny it seemed in comparison. Yudhishthir stood at its center, under the white umbrella that signified kingship. His face was pale and drawn. In his heart he still didn't want this war. Nor did he want so many thousands to die for his sake. Next to him, guarded by our staunchest soldiers, stood Sikhandi. Bhim led one flank, Nakul and Sahadev the other. I looked for Dhri. There he was, at the rear of the formation, his bronze and silver chariot rolling through the ranks as he gave commands to various officials. My sons rode behind him on chargers. With a start, I realized that every single person I cared for in the world was gathered on this field. How many of them would walk off it when the war ended in 18 days? Now my eyes were caught by a strange movement at the edge of the field. Arjun's golden chariot sped past the boundary of our army into the no man's land. Why would he go there now, while the war hung imminent above our heads? Was he not supposed to be at the head of the army to lead the attack? I could see Krishna guiding his 6 white horses. How skillfully he controlled them with the smallest flick of his wrist. With his whip he pointed out the scions of the Kaurava army, men my husband knew as well as he knew himself. And then Arjun dropped his beloved Gandiva, hid his face in his hands, and wept. Much has been written about Arjun's grief at this 11th hour, and what Krishna said in response to shake him out of immobility. Vyasa knew it first, dreaming it before it happened. They say he chanted it to Ganesha, god of beginnings, who penned it down. Was it him I'd glimpsed under the banyan with his pendulous elephant head? Others took up Krishna's words and translated them into many languages and meters. Some gave it elaborate names, but most merely called it the song. It wouldn't surprise me if poets and philosophers continue to write about it until the world dissolves on the day of Pralaya. No one, including Arjun himself, had anticipated that the bravest of the Pandavas would be paralyzed by guilt on seeing the kinsmen he'd have to kill in order to achieve victory. He was a practical man. All this time he had been the most impatient, the one most eager to test his skills. Who could have imagined that he would be so shaken by the thought of the devastated world we'd have to inhabit after the war had killed or maimed millions? But unless they are masters of evasion, all who begin a war must at some point face these emotions. Over the next few days, each of my other husbands would bitterly regret their part in the battle and wish it undone. But by then, we would all know this. War is like an avalanche. Once begun, it cannot cease until it has wreaked all the destruction it is capable of. When I watched Krishna advise Arjun, consoling him, teaching him how to be successful not only on this battlefield but beyond it, I almost didn't recognize the amusing, carefree man I had known since my girlhood. Where had he learned so many philosophies? When had he made their wisdom his own? I faithfully repeated the points he made to the other women when I joined them at night. The pleasures that arise from sense objects are bound to end. and thus they are only sources of pain. Don't get attached to them. And when a man reaches a state where honor and dishonor are alike to him, then he is considered supreme. Strive to gain such a state. Uttara was too distracted by her own concerns to pay much attention, but Kunti and Subhadra listened carefully and nodded in understanding. I couldn't imagine such a man of wisdom, however, far less aspire to be like him. I didn't know how to live without attachment or feel the same way toward honor and dishonor. Perhaps only when one possessed a greater treasure could one let go of this world. Krishna hinted that such a treasure was inside me. Weapons cannot harm it, fire cannot burn it. It is eternal, still, and blissful. But the words slippery as stones that have been left under water a long time slid from my fingers even as I tried to examine them. Wisdom that isn't distilled in my own crucible can't help us. Thus, though my mouth parroted Krishna's words, my will swung between remorse and revenge, and my heart wouldn't stop stinging. But one thing Krishna said struck me directly. When Arjun asked why man found himself driven to wrongdoing in spite of good intentions, Krishna replied, "Because of anger and desire, our two direst enemies." How well I knew them, my long-time companions, no, my masters, and their offspring, revenge, and how faithful they were. When I sought to rid myself of them, they clung to me most tenaciously. I couldn't claim, as Arjun did after hearing Krishna's discourse, that my delusions had vanished, but I learned to watch myself, and if I wasn't able to bar anger or her insidious cousin irritation from my heart, at least some of the time I bit back the sharp comments that I'd prided myself on dispensing so freely all these years. One part of Krishna's conversation with Arjun I was unable to report. Arjun spoke of it later, though his disjointed words didn't make much sense. He said Krishna had appeared to him in the form of God. His eyes were the sun and moon and fire, he added. In his body there were mountains and oceans, and the deep darkness of space beyond the stars. All our enemies and many of our friends fell into his gigantic mouth and were crushed to death. He shuddered. It was terrible and beautiful beyond description. Did you not see it? I shook my head. I only saw a great flash of light, as though a divine astra had been discharged. It blinded me. I thought the end of the world had come. It was the end of the world as I knew it, Arjun said. Now the meaning of everything is different. Our lives, our deaths, what we do in between. He stared into the distance and didn't say any more, but the sorrow was gone from his face. I too said nothing, but I was deeply hurt. Why hadn't Krishna, whom I believed to be my dear friend and protector, allowed me to see his cosmic form? Ever since the war began, he had had little to do with me. I understood that he was preoccupied with larger events, but this was a slight too huge to ignore. I decided I too would have nothing to do with him until I received proof of his caring. I decided this, but it didn't lessen the sting in my heart. I couldn't stop myself from wondering over and over why he considered Arjun more fitting to receive this vision. What crucial ingredient did I lack that the mystery of the universe should forever elude me? What else did the sight bring? My father locked in battle with Drona, both their faces rigid with old hatred. In between striking deathly blows at each other, they both remembered fragments of their shared past. Days at the hermitage, sharing lessons and food. A hunt where they had got lost in the forest together. The tears they had shed at parting. Bhim roaring as he killed Duryodhana's brothers. When the bloodlust receded from his mind, it was filled with remorse at fratricide, for no matter how he excused himself, he knew that the same blood ran in their veins. Ghatotkacha, bellowing with rage, all gentleness melted from his face as he used his Rakshasa magic to grow to gigantic proportions. When he crushed enemy soldiers under his feet as they fled in terror, his conscience cried, "Is this glory?" I saw Sikhandi, grown more androgynous by the moment, discharge arrow after arrow toward Bhishma, swearing in frustration when none of them could reach him. One part of his mind was relieved that he hadn't yet committed the heinous act of killing Bharat's greatest warrior. Arjun's chariot cut through the field like a meteor, burning everything in its path. But he took care to avoid his grandfather and his teacher, not ready to kill them yet. Thus the war went on, the physical battle outside matching the conflicts within each warrior. And yet, this did not mitigate the carnage. I saw the death throes of the innocent and the guilty, and both were equally terrible. In only a few hours, the ground turned red as though the skies had rained blood. What would happen by the end of the 18 days? I watched the pendulum of victory sway back and forth. 1 hour toward the Kauravas, the next toward the Pandavas, and with each swing I searched for and failed to find Karna, whose heart I most yearned to read. In the night I learned the reason for his absence. Before the war began, Bhishma told Duryodhana that he would command the Kaurava forces only if Karna stayed off the battlefield. Was this because of the long animosity between them? Or was it, as my husbands thought, that Bhishma was trying to protect them? Or was there a different reason related to the dream I'd had? Knowing Bhishma to be the more experienced warrior, Karna had acceded for the sake of his friend, but with great anger, for this was the war he had been preparing to fight all his life. Now he waited in his tent for Bhishma to win or die. My vision could not travel there, but my imagination made up for this lack. In it he paced up and down, his back ramrod straight, his weapons lying ready on the ascetic pallet where he slept. His ears were tuned to every sound of war. His whole being chafed with impatience. I imagined Duryodhana coming to him at the end of the day to discuss strategy and to vent his frustration with Bhishma, for he sensed that Bhishma's promise yoked him to the throne of Hastinapur. In his heart, the grandfather favored the Pandavas. Karna hid his own agitation to call him, agreeing as he had always done, the one friend Duryodhana could lean on. In case Bhishma failed, Karna assured him he would certainly kill Arjun. Didn't he possess Indra's Shakti, that invincible weapon? Once Arjun was gone, the Pandavas would be nothing. Why, Duryodhana could finish them off himself in a day or two. But after Duryodhana left, greatly cheered by such talk, Karna sank onto his pallet and pushed his hands over his face. When he removed them, why should I imagine this? His fingers were wet with tears.